Okay.
I am continuing on with the Grandma Hannah's Chronicles.
Is this a movie or a,
This is a video that will go on TV,
so
so
it'll be a movie type, a movie?
yes.
Okay.
Think of any documentary. This is like a documentary.
All right.
And later on, I'll put it all together and people can watch it on
You
TV for
sound like
future
a
years.
you sound like a talk show host.
Why, thank you.
Okay.
Just have myself a snooty name and some type of reputation. Tell me about your parents.
My parents. What would you like to know about
What
them?
were their names and what were they like as people?
Well, the names. Bessie Minkowitz was married to Morris Brown. Okay. As people, well, they came from a foreign country. My father came from Odessa. My mother came from Lithuania.
Where is
And
Odessa?
Odessa's Russia, at the water. I don't know what body of water. And my mother, Lithuania was a very sophisticated kind of location, very cultural. And anyway, they came to this country. They met here and they got married, and they fathered 4 children, mothered 4 children. I don't know which it is. And well, I was the last one to be born. What else would you like to
What
know?
did your father do for a living?
Oh, my father was an iron worker. Yeah, he was a very good worker. If he worked for somebody else, it was a good deal for everybody because he was a good worker. But when he worked for himself, you see, the problem was he was unable to keep a job very long because he was so religious. He did not want to work on the Sabbath, and in those days you had to work 6 days a week. If you didn't work on Saturday, you couldn't keep a job. So he had to go into business for himself. But he wasn't a businessman. He was more of an artist, you might say. In business, you have to be efficient, you have to do a good job, and you have to do it quickly if you want to stay in business. But when he built a fire escape, he built a monument, and you can't make a living that way. It's a work of art, but that's no way to make a living. So they struggled a lot financially. They struggled very much. And I personally think that religion was a negative thing because although he enjoyed being in the synagogue. In fact, it made him very happy, but he had obligations as a husband, as a father, and it seemed that religion took first place. He wouldn't work on Saturday. At the time, at that time, I didn't think about it too much. I just thought that that's where he wants to live his life, and okay. But now, as I look back, it was very unfair to my mother. And after all, he did bring 4 children in the world, and I think that should be first place, your first priority, not your religion and your God. But look, many people don't agree with me, but that's my thought.
What did your mother do for a living? Just raise the children?
Well, she brought up 4 children, and there were a lot of miscarriages, and some of the children passed away at birth, and in those days, they had, like, every year there was another baby or another miscarriage or another something. And when there's a lot of poverty and you have 4 children to feed, it's terrible. It's really very terrible to cope with that. But they loved each other, and the whole family loved each other, and we managed.
Now, they met in New York?
I would say yes. They met in New York, and probably in the Lower East Side. But when they got married, they moved to the Bronx, and the Bronx was at that time was considered the suburbs and very elegant. And my mother said she had a lovely apartment in the Bronx when she moved there, and she was very happy when they first got married. They had this lovely apartment. At the time that he married her, he was not that religious. He worked on Saturday, and I guess she never expected that he would stop working. She assumed that he would continue on in the same pattern. But I guess these so-called religious people become more fanatic as time goes on.
Do you believe that the end of World War II and the happenings of the Holocaust brought him closer to God? Or did this come before that?
Oh, long before that.
Long before that.
Oh, yeah, long before that, yeah.
Now, do you know why your mother and father came over from Europe to America to begin with?
Oh, all these people lived in shtetls or whatever you call them, and
What is the Stettles?
well, I mean, they lived in the Jewish enclaves. Is that what they call them? They lived in little towns among themselves, and then after a while, the government wouldn't accept the Jews, and they had pogroms, and they had to leave in order to save their lives. So there was a big immigration period around the time that they moved. Yeah, they all moved because they were afraid of their lives. So they moved, and they left everything, and they moved into poverty. I know that my mother says her father had a big, beautiful wholesale grocery business, and they were really considered rather very comfortable. They had, although my grandmother had a child every year, as everybody did in those days, but nevertheless she had enough help, and she even had what they called a wet nurse, that she didn't even have to nurse the children. There was a wet nurse to take care of that, and she went to work in the business. But anyway, then they came to this country, left everything behind, lived in the Lower East Side, and in those days, when they had an apartment, there was like one bathroom on the floor for everybody that lived on the floor. So it was not and nowhere like it was when my mother moved to the Bronx. She had her own apartment, her own bathroom, and it was considered very elegant. But and it would have been wonderful if only my father wasn't so religious, and if he had just kept his work, his job.
Now, do you remember anything about your grandparents? Did they come over with your parents?
Oh yes, yeah. Oh, the only grandparent I knew was my mother's mother. My mother's father died. Oh, my mother's father came over to this country, and I didn't know at the time, when I was a little girl, what happened to him. But I learned much, much later that he was, I guess he was working, and he had his salary, and some hoodlum attacked him and killed him for the money.
Really?
Oh yeah, he was murdered. I didn't know he was murdered. I thought,
In the city?
Yeah, in Manhattan, the Lower East Side. I thought he died because he might have had cancer, because he died too young. But then later I learned, no, he was murdered. They always kept, when we talked about, when his name came up, the family was always very quiet. I guess they didn't want the children to be upset and hear that. I guess it's not a happy thing for little kids to hear that, so they wanted to protect us by not telling us.
How old were you when this happened?
Oh, I guess I must have been a baby. I never met him. I never knew him. And on my father's side, I knew his mother, but they lived in Brooklyn, pretty far away. We didn't have a car or anything like that then. So I very rarely saw them. And my grandfather on my father's side too, I never met him either. So my mother's mother was around, lived in our neighborhood, even lived with us at times. So I was very close to her, and I loved her. She had a lot of charisma, and she was an attractive woman, and I loved her. I guess she loved me too. It was very nice, yeah, that was nice.
Now, did your parents not get along with their parents, insofar as you did not know your grandparents?
Well, as far as getting along, my father's mother lived so far away, so it was not a question of getting along. They were never there together. So that, as far as her own mother, well, it's her own mother, so, you have your fights and you have your good times together. There were fights too.
Do you remember their names?
Well, I'll tell you what, I want to tell you this. When my grandmother's husband was killed, then eventually she got married again. And I remember, what I remember the early years when she was married a second time, that's when I remember her and that man. He was kind of a sick guy, and he was kind of very impatient with children. And when I came to the house, he carried on. I was terrified of him. I was quiet, didn't say a word, and yet he couldn't stand a child around. Anyway, he eventually died. And then my grandmother found it very difficult because I guess she missed him. She lost her apartment. She had to live with her children, and it was not a good thing for her at all. No, very unhappy. I remember one day she said in Yiddish, she said, "It's better to have a straw man than no man." That's how bad it was when he died. And this is a second husband. Anyway, so much for her. Anything else you want to know?
Food for thought for future generations, yes. We will hide this from people that may be age sensitive, but you were a child of the Depression. What do you remember about the Depression?
Oh, you know something?
Or were you a teenager? Were you a child
No,
or a
I was
teenager?
a child, but it continued on for many years, so I grew into a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that when you live in a neighborhood where everybody is suffering, if you want to call it suffering, well, little children don't do the suffering, the parents do the suffering. The little children, somehow or other, they get their food and they play with their friends, and I don't think they realize that there's a depression, not really. And I had friends around, and I guess I didn't suffer, no. As children, we didn't suffer. I suppose in some families they didn't have food, maybe they would, but we always had food.
Now, did you have to work to supplement any of the income as a teenager?
Well, later on, yes, later on, well, after I got out of high school, I went to work a while, yes, and I didn't earn very much. I worked for in a law office, and they didn't pay very much, but I liked working there because it was a professional office, and it was good environment, and I liked being there. And yes, when I got a salary, I remember I gave some money to my parents. Some I kept for myself. Some I kept. I think I put away $1 in the bank to make sure I saved some money, and I had to have money for lunch and coffee. And I had to buy stockings or whatever. So it didn't go very far, but I did give money. I made it my business to give my parents some money, and I have to tell you, it's not a feather in my cap, but I think I was the only member of the family that gave money in the house. My sister, my older sister, uh, spent all her money that she earned on clothes.
This
She
is
was
Gertie?
Gertie. She wanted beautiful clothes. She spent it all on clothes. She had a telephone which she paid for, and well, I didn't get a telephone because I felt that it was a waste of money. I felt we couldn't afford it. But now, as I look back, would have been very important to have a telephone, because for a girl, you know, you meet people, you meet boys, you meet fellows, and how could he reach you? So it doesn't develop into anything. Fortunately, your grandfather, who became my husband, he found a way because he used to write to me. He couldn't. There was no phone, so he'd write to me, and in that way we got together. But it was really very wrong not to find a way somehow to get a phone. I know when my sister Gertie got married and moved out, she said to my mother, she said, "You must keep the phone for Anne. She's growing up. You must have a phone." And I said, "Look, well, whoever will want me will find me. Will find a way. We can't afford a phone," and we left it like that. And so many people, I met so many fellows. They took me home, and they wanted to see. They wanted to get my phone number. I gave them the phone number of the drugstore, and then the man at the drugstore said, "Look," he says, "I don't have people to call you. We didn't even have money to give the kids a tip, so the kids stopped coming over to tell me about the message. So I never got those calls." Well, anyway.
Your lost grandpa's gain.
Yeah, and my gain too, because he was a wonderful man.
Ah! How'd you two first meet, since you're on this subject anyways?
Oh, we met at the YMHA in Manhattan, 92nd
You
Street.
bumped into him at the Y?
No, they had a dance. Oh, they had dances on Saturday and Sunday, and I would go down there with my friends either Saturday or Sunday, and we'd meet fellows there. We felt that the fellows you meet at the Y are a higher class fellow than the fellows you meet at other places. Because we felt that it's a Y, and it's many of the fellows, they belonged to clubs there, and it was nice. And well, there was a dance there, and he was there, and I was there with my friends. They had a lot of people there. I'll tell you, in those days when they had a dance, they had the room bright, lit up. It lit up, you could see everybody clearly. And of course there was music, and there was a very wholesome atmosphere. I understand today when you go to a dance or somewhere, the place is dark, they hardly see each other, and the music is very loud, it's hard to talk. There the music was subdued, we'd talk, you could develop a friendship in a place like that, and it was nice.
Now, who approached whom?
Oh, he approached me. I, I was standing there with two friends, and he was at the other end of the room. He was standing there alone, and he noticed me. And the girls I was with said to me, "There's a fellow over there that's looking at you." I said, "Where?" He said, "Down there, he's looking at you." So I took a look, and I saw him. He was he had a new outfit on. He had a new suit, and later when we went out, he had a new coat and a new hat. He was old. He had gotten a whole outfit, so when he goes to a dance, he'll be ready to meet a nice girl. Anyway, so they said, "Well, he's looking at you. He keeps looking at you." And I looked at him, and then I looked away, and then one of them said, "He's coming over." I said, "He is?" I saw him walking over. He wanted to dance. He walked over so he could meet me and dance with me. So he asked me in such a manner that there was no way I could refuse. He said to me, "May I have the pleasure of this dance?" And when a fellow says a thing like that to a girl, there's nothing, it's not like a wisecrack like some fellows would say, "You want to dance?" When he said it that way, I said, I have to say yes, no matter what. And I was kind of curious about him. What man asks a girl to dance like that way? And of course, that he was looking at me. That too made me curious. So I was kind of looking him over and see what he's like. But he was very nice. He was just very nice. And then when it came time to go home, oh, so my friend said to me, "What's the matter? You couldn't get rid of him?" I said, "Oh no." I said, "He was very nice. I didn't want to get rid of him." So they went home, the two of them together, and he was going to take me home. And then he said, "Well," he said, "why don't we go in? We'll have some hot chocolate and a muffin, a corn muffin, I think." So I thought that was nice because most fellows, if they took you home, it was enough that they spend the car fare to take you home, because in those days money came very difficult to anybody. So that if they spent coffee for you, it's enough.
What year was this?
Beg your pardon?
What year was this? Roundabout.
The 1930s.
Mid 30s.
Yeah, a little later, closer to the 40s, because I think the war was on around that time. The World War II was on, and the World War II went on into the 40s. So this was the beginning of world. I don't know whether World War II started yet or very soon, but I know it was the time that we were together. It went into the war. Even when we got married, the war was on for a while. Anyway, so we had the hot chocolate, and then he took me home, and we were talking, and we had a lot to say. And
He walked you home, or did he take a taxi home?
Oh no, taxis? Who took taxis in those days? I think you have a taxi here now. They're coming in. He's coming in.
Oh, he's early. He's very early. Well, we're going to have to conclude this session 15 minutes early. I'm going to the airport to fly back to Phoenix.
Have a wonderful trip.
Thank you, Grandma, and we will continue this another visit.
Okay. The only thing is I want to hear it played back, and I won't get it.
I can always put this online.
On his computer?
Uh-huh. I'll figure a way out.
Okay.
We must say goodbye for now, though.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye, dear.